a bit of an arena, and we will have a number of speakers who are going to explain what they think about the bedroom tax, what we're going to do to stop or to axe the bedroom tax, and also to hear the real stories of who is affected, how they're affected, and why they're affected. And if you have placards nearby, please hold some up so everyone can see what this is about here today. And as usual, we'll have plenty of photographs. I do want to do a big thank you and a big welcome to our brothers and sisters from Bolton who've come down today on a coach. So big it up for the Bolton crew. It sounds amazing, but 4 weeks ago, when we had our last demonstration, Linda and a few people came from Bolton, and now they went back, and what have they got? They've got groups all over Bolton, and a Bolton citywide federation, and very strong links with the trade unions in Bolton, both the Unison Group and the Union Group at Bolton Homes, but also Bolton Trades Council. And I do think, and I do know, we will be hearing from some of the Bolton people this afternoon. Now, if everyone's here and ready, if I can ask Owen and also Maria to come up. Owen Jones, very well known, don't have to give him any introduction, but he spoke a few weeks ago at the Manchester People's Assembly. And Maria from our Bedroom Tax Group was also speaking on that platform, and that unity, that jointness that's at the heart of the anti-bedroom tax movement is really one that we have now enshrined in our campaign. So if I can introduce, please, Owen Jones to speak to us today. Thank you.
Firstly, I just want to say I'm always humbled to speak at a protest like this, because it's not my voice or the voices of people like me that's important. It's the voices of people like Maria, people who've actually been affected by this bedroom tax. And ever since this crisis began, what this government and the British media have tried to do is this. They've tried to airbrush out of existence and silence those who've been affected by the disgraceful policies of this disgraceful government. And we must give a platform, above all else, to people who've been affected, to hear their stories, to be able to get the truth out to people in terms of what's actually happening to people's lives as a result of these policies. And that is why these protests are just so important. That's what we're doing. We're coming out because some of you will be affected, some of you won't. But we've got one principle, and it's such an important principle, and it is this: an injury to one is an injury to all of us. That is our principle. And the important thing that we all have to make sure doesn't happen is that we're picked off one by one, that each battle is taken in isolation, that we link up our struggles, whether we're disabled, whether we're working people, whether we've been thrown out of work, whether you're a young person who faces a future of debt and insecurity, or an elderly person who has to choose between heating your home and actually being able to eat. These are the things we've got to link together. And what this government does, and this is what's so disgraceful about this government, it is trying to redirect our anger at the fact we're getting poorer year on year, that working people, unemployed people, disabled people are suffering, to redirect the anger from those who cause this crisis to people's neighbours down the streets. The working poor against unemployed people, non-disabled against disabled people, private sector workers against public sector workers. You've been mugged, so your less deserving neighbour should be mugged as well. We've got to give unity to make people remember who caused this crisis and who's been made to pay for it. Now, in terms of fighting this bedroom tax, we've got to take, obviously, the fight to the Tories, a policy which affects 2/3 of those affected, of course, disabled, people who are already struggling to make ends meet. But we also have to say loudly and clearly to the Labour leadership that if you form the next government, no ifs, no buts, repeal this tax. We have to make that clear. Now, Now what we're seeing at the moment with this crisis is the biggest squeeze in people's living standards since records began. The only booming industry in this country are food banks, which 500,000 people depend on. This is the 7th richest country on earth. And apparently people can no longer afford to eat. What an absolute stain on modern British society. The most important thing we've got to do is give people hope. Sometimes it seems these battles are just too overwhelming. There's so many fights and so many fronts. The privatisation of our NHS, cuts to people's benefits in work and out of work, disabled people and so on. All of these battles seem overwhelming, but we've got to realise it's possible to fight back, and it is possible to win. Remember the movement against the poll tax? Thatcher seemed invincible. She'd taken on the miners and defeated them. But we didn't just back then defeat the poll tax. That movement helped boot Margaret Thatcher out of number 10. Give you other examples. I went to Leeds a few months ago. I met bin workers. Now, their council back in 2009 tried to cut their wages by up to a third. And they went on strike for weeks. And there was a difficult and frankly frightening struggle for many people. They had families to look after. They got up every day at 5 a.m. in freezing cold temperature. But they won. And I'll give you another example. The electricians who took on Balfour Beatty in London, they went on strike, they occupied, they fought against a massive multinational company, and they won as well. And let's remember UK Uncut. Who was talking about tax avoidance a few years ago? No one. It was out on the fringes. Someone's put their hands up. There was a few people. It was out there on the fringes. Until people took part in peaceful civil disobedience, occupied banks and shops by tax dodgers who refused to pay their taxes. And they won as well. They got tax avoidance on the agenda. Everyone's talking about it. It is possible to fight back. And it is possible to win. And finally, let's give people hope by talking about alternatives. Let's talk about the fact, there are 5 million people stuck on social housing waiting lists. We've got massive overcrowding. We're spending £23 billion a year, which is increasingly subsidising landlords through housing benefit. So instead, let's say, let councils build housing, creating jobs, stimulating the economy, and let's control rents. Instead of forcing people to pay for the failure of successive governments to build council housing, let's talk about a living wage instead of subsidising wages, low wages, with tax credits. Let's talk about creating hundreds of thousands of renewable energy jobs to take on unemployment like Germany have done. Let's talk about controlling the banks that we, the people, bailed out and still have no control over. Let's talk about an all-out war against tax avoidance instead of the pittance lost through benefit fraud. Let's talk about this and give people hope. But above all else, let's give a platform to those affected so they can share their stories, so they can get the truth out. And finally, I hope many of you will be marching up afterwards to the People's Assembly. The whole point of the People's Assembly is that principle of an injury to one is an injury to all of us. Let's build that broad coalition. Private and public sector workers, disabled people, people unemployed, students, young people facing a terrifying future, elderly people and so on. We'll be having a massive march on the 29th of September when the Tories have the cheek to invade this city. Let's give them a very warm Mancunian welcome. And on the 5th of November, we're talking about a day of national peaceful civil disobedience, a proud tradition going back decades, going back to the suffragettes and those before, taking part in direct action. So let's go out there, let's have hope and confidence, let's take on this absolutely disgraceful government, let's give people hope, and most importantly, let's win. Thank you.
Fantastic, Owen. Maria's going to say a few words, please. Maria Brabant.